In the ancient mountains of Tibet, where the air grows thin and the silence speaks louder than words, there lived a young monk named Tenzin, who carried within his heart a burden heavier than the stones he gathered each morning for the monastery walls. His mind raced like wild horses across endless plains, never finding rest, never discovering the peace that seemed to flow so naturally through his elder brothers in their saffron robes. Each dawn, as the first light painted the peaks in shades of gold and amber, Tenzin would sit in meditation with the others, his body perfectly still, his breathing measured and deep, yet his thoughts continued their relentless dance. He watched his breath rise and fall, counted each inhalation and exhalation, but still his mind wandered to the village below, to the family he had left behind, to the doubts that gnawed at his resolve like hungry spirits in the night. The master of the monastery, an ancient man whose eyes held the depth of mountain lakes, noticed the young monk's struggle. His name was Lobsang, and he had spent 70 years learning the art of perfect stillness. One evening, as the butter lamps flickered in the prayer hall and the scent of juniper incense filled the air, he approached Tenzin with steps as silent as falling snow. "Come," the old master said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Walk with me to the edge of the world." Together, they climbed higher than Tenzin had ever ventured past. The last stunted trees passed the final patches of hardy grass until they stood upon a precipice where the mountains seemed to touch the very heart of the sky. Below them stretched an ocean of clouds, silver in the moonlight, rolling and shifting like the thoughts in Tenzin's restless mind. "Tell me," Lobsang said, settling himself upon a flat stone worn smooth by countless winds, "what do you see when you look upon these clouds?" Tenzin studied the vast expanse before them, watching as the mist formed and reformed, creating shapes that appeared and dissolved in endless succession. "I see chaos," he replied honestly. "I see movement without purpose, change without meaning." The old master smiled, his weathered face creasing like ancient parchment. "And yet," he said, "beneath these clouds lies the earth solid and unmoved. The mountains remain, the valleys endure. The rivers continue their patient journey to the sea. The clouds dance and play, but they do not disturb the fundamental nature of what lies beneath." As they sat in silence, Tenzin began to understand. His thoughts were like these clouds, constantly shifting, appearing and disappearing. But beneath them lay something deeper, something that remained unchanged, regardless of the mental weather above. The master continued his words, flowing like water over smooth stones. "Your mind is not your thoughts, young one. Your mind is the vast sky in which thoughts arise and pass away. You have been trying to stop the clouds, but the sky never struggles against them." Through the long night they remained on that precipice, and gradually Tenzin felt something shift within him. He stopped fighting the arising of thoughts and instead began to rest in the awareness that observed them. Like clouds passing through an infinite sky, his worries and doubts continued to appear, but now he saw them for what they truly were, temporary visitors in the boundless space of consciousness. As the first rays of dawn began to illuminate the peaks around them, Tenzin experienced a profound stillness that he had never known before. It was not the absence of thought, but rather a deep recognition of his true nature as the awareness in which all thoughts arose and dissolved. The burden he had carried for so long began to lighten, not because his circumstances had changed, but because he had discovered the unchanging peace that had always been present, hidden beneath the turbulent surface of his mind. "This is the first teaching," Lobsang said, as they prepared to descend back to the monastery. "To recognize that you are not the weather of your mind, but the sky itself. Rest in this knowing and let all experiences arise and pass away in the vast space of your being." From that day forward, Tenzin's meditation practice transformed completely. He no longer struggled against his thoughts, but welcomed them as temporary guests in the infinite expanse of his awareness. Years passed, and Tenzin himself became a teacher, sharing this profound understanding with other young monks who came to the monastery carrying their own burdens of restless minds. He would often take them to that same precipice where he had first glimpsed his true nature, pointing to the clouds below and reminding them that peace is not found by controlling the weather, but by recognizing the unchanging sky of consciousness that remains forever untouched by the passing storms of thought and emotion. In the deepest hours of night, when the world grows quiet and the mind naturally begins to settle, this ancient wisdom continues to offer its gift. Like Tenzin, discovering the sky beyond the clouds, each soul can find that place of perfect rest that exists beyond the reach of worry, beyond the grasp of fear, in the infinite stillness that is our deepest nature. Here in this sacred space of pure awareness, true peace reveals itself not as something to be achieved, but as something that has always been present, waiting patiently to be recognized and embraced. In a quiet village nestled between rolling hills and whispering bamboo groves, there lived a potter named Kenji, whose hands had shaped clay for 40 years, yet whose heart remained as restless as autumn leaves caught in an endless wind. Each morning, he would rise before dawn, light the fire in his kiln, and begin the ancient dance of creation, transforming humble earth into vessels of beauty and purpose. But despite the mastery of his craft, despite the reverence with which villagers spoke his name, Kenji carried within himself a deep dissatisfaction that no amount of praise or success could quiet. His workshop stood at the edge of the village, where the sound of the river provided a constant gentle murmur that had accompanied his work for decades. The walls were lined with shelves holding countless pieces, each one a testament to his skill, each one perfect in its form and function. Yet, as Kenji looked upon his creations, he felt only emptiness, as if he were gazing at the works of a stranger. The joy that had once filled his heart when the clay yielded to his touch had gradually faded, replaced by a mechanical precision that brought no satisfaction. One evening, as the last light of day filtered through the paper screens of his workshop, an old wandering monk appeared at his door. The monk's robes were patched and faded, his feet bare and dusty from long travels, yet his eyes held a brightness that seemed to illuminate the growing darkness. "Master Potter," the monk said with a gentle bow, "I have heard of your skill even in distant monasteries. Might an old traveler request a simple bowl for his evening meal?" Kenji welcomed the monk inside, offering him tea and a place to rest while he prepared to work. But as he reached for his finest clay, the monk raised a weathered hand. "If I may," the old man said softly, "I would be honored to watch you work, but perhaps you might use the clay that others would discard, the earth that seems imperfect, unsuitable for your usual masterpieces." Puzzled but respectful, Kenji retrieved a lump of clay that he had set aside earlier. Clay that was coarse and filled with small stones, clay that any master would consider inferior. As he began to work, his trained hands immediately noticed every imperfection, every grain of sand that would normally cause him to start over with better material. Yet something in the monk's presence encouraged him to continue to work with what was before him rather than seeking perfection in the raw materials. As the wheel turned and the clay rose between his palms, something extraordinary began to happen. Instead of fighting against the imperfections, Kenji found himself working with them, allowing the small stones to create unexpected textures, letting the coarse grain of the clay guide the shape rather than imposing his will upon it. The bowl that emerged was unlike anything he had ever created, rough in places, smooth in others, with a natural asymmetry that spoke of the earth from which it came. The monk watched in silence as Kenji worked, and when the bowl was complete, he held it with the reverence one might show a sacred relic. "This," he said, his voice filled with quiet wonder, "is the most beautiful vessel I have ever seen, not because it is perfect, but because it is perfectly itself. You have not imposed your idea of beauty upon the clay, but have allowed the clay to reveal its own inherent nature." As the monk spoke these words, something profound shifted in Kenji's understanding. For 40 years, he had been trying to create perfection, to force the clay to conform to his vision of what a pot should be. He had measured his worth by how closely his creations matched an ideal that existed only in his mind, never recognizing that true beauty lay not in the absence of flaws, but in the authentic expression of each material's unique character. "The clay teaches us," the monk continued, settling himself comfortably on a cushion beside the potter's wheel, "that perfection is not the elimination of imperfection, but the complete acceptance of what is. When you stopped fighting against the nature of this clay and began to work in harmony with it, you discovered something far more precious than technical mastery. You found the art of allowing it." Through the night, the monk shared stories of other craftsmen he had encountered in his travels, each one a master who had discovered that true excellence came not from controlling their materials, but from developing such sensitivity that they could respond perfectly to whatever presented itself. A swordsmith who learned to work with the natural grain of the metal, creating blades of legendary strength. A calligrapher who allowed the brush to dance with the paper, rather than forcing it to create predetermined strokes. As dawn approached, Kenji understood that his dissatisfaction had not come from any lack of skill, but from his constant struggle against the natural flow of his craft. He had been so focused on achieving an external standard of perfection that he had lost touch with the joy of creation itself, the simple pleasure of hands working in harmony with earth and fire and water. The monk prepared to continue his journey as the sun rose, but before departing, he offered one final teaching. "Remember," he said, shouldering his simple pack, "that you are like the clay on your wheel. Life is the potter, and wisdom comes not from resisting the pressure of circumstances, but from yielding to them with such complete trust that you become exactly what you are meant to be." From that day forward, Kenji's approach to his craft transformed completely. He began each day not with a plan for what he would create, but with an openness to what wanted to emerge. He worked with inferior clay as readily as with the finest materials, finding beauty in every texture, grace in every unexpected turn of the wheel. His pieces became renowned not for their technical perfection, but for their authentic expression of the marriage between human intention and natural form. Visitors would often find him in his workshop, hands covered in clay, face lit with the same joy he had known as a young apprentice. When they asked about his transformation, he would simply smile and point to a rough, asymmetrical bowl that held a place of honor on his highest shelf. "That bowl," he would say, taught me that perfection is not something we create, but something we discover when we stop trying to improve what is already complete. In the quiet hours before sleep, when the mind naturally releases its grip on the day's struggles and disappointments, this ancient wisdom offers its gentle guidance. Like Kenji, learning to work with imperfect clay, each soul can discover the profound peace that comes from accepting life exactly as it presents itself. Finding in every apparent flaw the perfect expression of an intelligence far greater than our limited understanding can grasp. In the ancient forests of Japan, where cedar trees stood like silent guardians reaching toward heaven, there lived a woodcutter named Hiroshi, who had spent his entire life among these towering giants. Each day he would venture deep into the woodland with his sharp axe and weathered hands, selecting trees that had completed their natural cycle, harvesting timber that would become homes and temples for the people of nearby villages. Yet, despite his deep knowledge of the forest and his respect for every tree he felled, Hiroshi carried within his heart a growing sense of disconnection from the very woods that had been his lifelong companion. The forest had been his teacher since childhood, when his grandfather first showed him how to read the signs that indicated which trees were ready for harvest, how to listen to the whisper of wind through branches to understand the health of the woodland, how to move through the undergrowth without disturbing the delicate balance of life that thrived in every shadow and sunbeam. But as the years passed and the demands of the villages grew greater, Hiroshi found himself rushing through his work, focused only on meeting quotas and deadlines, no longer taking time to truly see the forest that surrounded him. One misty morning, as autumn painted the leaves in shades of gold and crimson, Hiroshi encountered something that would change his understanding forever. Deep in a grove he had never explored before, he came upon an ancient tree of such immense size and age that it seemed to exist in a realm beyond ordinary time. Its trunk was so vast that 20 men could not have encircled it with their arms, its branches so high they disappeared into the morning mist, its roots so deep and widespread that they seemed to embrace the entire forest floor. As Hiroshi stood before this magnificent being, axe in hand, he felt something he had not experienced in years. The tree seemed to radiate a presence so profound, so ancient and wise, that he found himself unable to move, unable even to consider the possibility of cutting it down. Instead, he set his axe aside and placed his palm against the rough bark, feeling the slow, steady pulse of life that had been flowing through this trunk for perhaps 1,000 years. In that moment of contact, something extraordinary occurred. Hiroshi began to sense the vast network of communication that connected this ancient tree to every other plant in the forest. Through its roots, it shared nutrients with smaller trees that struggled in its shadow. Through chemical signals carried on the wind, it warned distant relatives of approaching dangers. Through the mycorrhizal fungi that threaded through the soil, it participated in an underground internet of information and mutual support that spanned the entire woodland. As he stood there, hand pressed against the bark, Hiroshi realized that he had been seeing the forest all wrong. He had viewed it as a collection of individual trees, each one separate and independent, each one either useful for his purposes or not. But now he understood that the forest was a single living entity, a vast organism in which every tree, every shrub, every flower and fern played an essential role in maintaining the health and balance of the whole. The ancient tree seemed to speak to him without words, sharing the wisdom it had accumulated through centuries of growth and change. It had weathered countless storms, survived droughts and floods, witnessed the rise and fall of human civilizations, yet it remained rooted in the eternal present moment, drawing sustenance from earth and sky, giving shelter to countless creatures, participating fully in the endless dance of life and death and renewal. That was the forest's deepest teaching. Hours passed as Hiroshi remained in communion with the great tree, and gradually he began to understand that his own life had become disconnected from this natural rhythm. He had been rushing through his days like a man fleeing from something, never pausing to truly experience the present moment, never allowing himself to feel his deep connection to the living world around him. The tree's patient presence reminded him that true fulfillment came not from accomplishing more tasks, but from being fully present to whatever task was at hand. As the sun reached its zenith and began its slow descent toward the western mountains, Hiroshi made a decision that would transform his approach to his work forever. He would no longer rush through the forest with his mind focused on quotas and deadlines. Instead, he would move through the woodland with the same patient awareness that the ancient tree had shown him, taking time to truly see each plant, each stone, each play of light and shadow that made up the intricate tapestry of the forest. From that day forward, Hiroshi's relationship with his work became a form of moving meditation. Before cutting any tree, he would spend time in silent communion with it, expressing gratitude for its sacrifice, ensuring that its death would serve the greater good of both forest and human community. He learned to work with the natural rhythms of the woodland, harvesting only what was needed, always leaving the forest healthier and more balanced than he had found it. The villagers noticed the change in the quality of timber that Hiroshi provided. The wood seemed to carry within it a special vitality, a strength and beauty that made it perfect for the most sacred construction projects. Temples built with his lumber seemed to radiate a peaceful energy that calmed all who entered them. Houses framed with his beams became homes where families thrived in harmony and contentment. When people asked Hiroshi about the secret of his transformation, he would smile and speak of the ancient tree that had become his teacher. "The forest taught me," he would say, "that we are not separate from the world around us, but part of a vast living system in which every action affects the whole. When we work in harmony with this natural order, our labor becomes a form of prayer. Our daily tasks become opportunities for communion with the sacred." Years later, when Hiroshi had become an old man himself, he would often return to visit the ancient tree that had awakened him to this deeper understanding. He would sit in meditation beneath its vast canopy, feeling his own roots extending deep into the earth, his own branches reaching towards the infinite sky. In these moments of perfect stillness, he experienced the same timeless peace that the tree had shown him, the recognition that beneath all the apparent separation and struggle of human life lay an unshakable unity, a fundamental interconnectedness that could never be broken. The forest continued to be his teacher until the end of his days, and when his time came to leave this world, the villagers buried him beneath the ancient tree that had transformed his life. They said that on quiet mornings, when the mist rose from the forest floor and the first light of dawn filtered through the canopy, they could still feel his presence, there merged forever with the eternal wisdom of the woodland, part of the endless cycle of growth and decay and renewal that was the forest's greatest gift to all who learned to listen to its silent teachings. In the gentle hours before sleep, when the mind naturally settles into the rhythm of the breath and the heart opens to the deeper currents of life, this ancient wisdom continues to offer its healing presence. Like Hiroshi, discovering his unity with the forest, each soul can awaken to the profound interconnectedness that underlies all existence, finding in this recognition a peace that transcends all understanding, a belonging that can never be lost. In the high mountains of ancient China, where the morning mist clung to jagged peaks like silk scarves draped across the shoulders of sleeping giants, there lived a tea master named Li Wei, whose reputation for creating the perfect cup had spread throughout the empire. His small tea house, perched on a narrow ledge overlooking a valley of impossible beauty, attracted visitors from distant provinces who would climb treacherous paths for days just to experience the transcendent quality of tea prepared by his masterful hands. Li Wei had devoted 30 years to perfecting his art, studying under the greatest masters, learning the subtle differences between leaves picked at dawn versus those harvested at dusk, understanding how the temperature of water could transform the same tea into completely different experiences. His movements during the tea ceremony were like a carefully choreographed dance, each gesture precise and purposeful, each pause timed to allow the leaves to release their essence at exactly the right moment. Yet, despite his mastery and the reverence with which pilgrims spoke his name, Li Wei found himself increasingly troubled by a growing emptiness that no amount of praise could fill. The joy he had once felt in the simple act of preparing tea had gradually been replaced by a mechanical perfection that brought him no satisfaction. He performed each step of the ceremony flawlessly, but his heart remained as cold as winter stone, untouched by the beauty he created for others. One autumn evening, as the last golden light painted the mountain peaks in shades of amber and rose, an unexpected visitor appeared at his tea house. She was not like the wealthy merchants or scholarly officials who usually sought his services, but rather a simple peasant woman. Her clothes patched and worn, her face weathered by years of hard labor in the fields below. Her feet were bare and dusty from the long climb, her hands rough and stained from working the earth. "Master Li," she said with a humble bow, "I have saved for 3 years to make this journey. My daughter is to be married next month, and I wished to learn how to prepare tea properly for the ceremony. I know I cannot afford your usual instruction, but perhaps you might show kindness to an old woman who wants only to honor her child with the best she can offer." Something in the woman's simple sincerity touched a place in Li Wei's heart that had been dormant for years. Without hesitation, he invited her to sit at his low table and began to prepare tea, not with his usual elaborate ceremony, but with a natural ease he had not felt in decades. As he worked, the woman watched with such complete attention, such genuine appreciation for every small detail that Li Wei found himself truly seeing his own actions for the first time in years. "The water," he explained as he heated it over the charcoal fire, "must be brought to the temperature where it whispers but does not shout. Listen carefully, and you will hear when it is ready." The woman leaned forward, her entire being focused on the subtle sounds emerging from the kettle. When the moment came, her face lit with wonder, as if she had discovered a profound secret. As Li Wei continued the preparation, something extraordinary began to happen. The woman's innocent questions and genuine delight in each step of the process awakened in him a fresh appreciation for arts. He had been practicing mechanically for years. Through her eyes, he saw again the miracle of dried leaves transforming into liquid poetry, the alchemy of earth and water and fire combining to create something greater than the sum of their parts. "Why do you pause here?" she asked as Li Wei held the teapot motionless for several heartbeats before beginning to pour. The question caught him off guard, for he had been making this pause for so many years that he had forgotten its original purpose. As he considered how to answer, he realized that this moment of stillness was not just a technical requirement, but a sacred space where intention and gratitude could infuse the tea with something beyond mere flavor. "In this pause," he said slowly, the words coming from a deeper place than his usual explanations, "we honor all those who made this moment possible. The farmers who tended the tea plants, the earth that nourished them, the rain that fed their roots, the sun that gave them life. We acknowledge that this simple cup contains the entire universe." The woman nodded with understanding. That went far beyond her humble education, recognizing truth when she heard it. Through the long evening, as they shared cup after cup of tea, Li Wei found himself rediscovering the profound spiritual dimension of his art that he had somehow lost in his pursuit of technical perfection. The woman's presence reminded him that tea ceremony was not about impressing others with his skill, but about creating a sacred space where hearts could open and souls could commune in perfect harmony. "Master Li," the woman said as the night deepened around them, "you have given me far more than instruction in preparing tea. You have shown me that any simple task performed with complete attention and genuine love becomes a form of prayer." Her words struck him like lightning, illuminating a truth he had forgotten in his years of striving for recognition and acclaim. As dawn approached and the woman prepared to begin her long journey home, she offered Li Wei a small gift wrapped in rough cloth. Inside was a simple clay cup, clearly made by inexperienced hands, its shape irregular and its glaze uneven. "I made this myself," she said shyly, "thinking perhaps you might use it sometimes, and remember that the most beautiful vessel is one that holds love, not one that displays skill." After the woman departed, Li Wei sat alone in his tea house holding the humble cup and feeling tears flow down his cheeks for the first time in years. He realized that in his pursuit of perfection, he had lost touch with the very essence of what made tea ceremony meaningful. The elaborate rituals and precise techniques were merely the outer form. The true art lay in the quality of presence and intention he brought to each moment. From that day forward, Li Wei's approach to his craft underwent a complete transformation. He continued to maintain the highest standards of technical excellence, but now each movement flowed from a heart filled with gratitude and wonder. He began each day by drinking tea from the simple clay cup the peasant woman had given him, using this humble vessel to remind himself that true mastery was not about impressing others, but about serving them with complete sincerity. Visitors to his tea house noticed the change immediately. The tea he prepared seemed to carry within it a quality of peace and joy that touched them at the deepest level. Many reported that drinking his tea was like receiving a blessing, a moment of perfect clarity that stayed with them long after they had descended the mountain and returned to their ordinary lives. Years later, when students asked Li Wei about the secret of his transformation, he would simply smile and pour tea into the worn clay cup that held the place of honor on his table. "This cup," he would say, "taught me that perfection is not about having no flaws, but about serving others with a heart so full of love that even the humblest offering becomes sacred." In the quiet moments before sleep, when the day's activities settle into memory and the heart opens to deeper truths, this ancient wisdom continues to offer its gentle teaching. Like Li Wei, rediscovering the sacred in the simple, each soul can find that the most ordinary moments of life become gateways to the infinite when approached with complete presence and unconditional love. In the bustling marketplace of ancient Kyoto, where merchants hawked their wares beneath colorful banners and the air filled with the mingled scents of incense spices and blooming cherry blossoms, there worked a humble calligrapher named Akira, whose small stall occupied the least desirable corner of the square. While other vendors called out loudly to attract customers displaying their goods with elaborate presentations, Akira sat quietly behind his simple wooden table brush in hand, creating beautiful characters on rice paper, with movements as fluid as water flowing over stones. Despite his extraordinary skill with brush and ink, Akira struggled to make even the most modest living. Customers would pause to admire his work, praising the elegance of his strokes and the perfect balance of his compositions, but few were willing to pay what his art was truly worth. They would haggle over prices, comparing his handcrafted scrolls to the cheaper printed materials available from other merchants, unable to see the difference between mere words and the living spirit that flowed through authentic calligraphy. Each evening, as Akira packed away his brushes and unsold scrolls, he felt the weight of failure settling upon his shoulders like a heavy cloak. His wife worked long hours as a seamstress to help support their small family, and their children wore patched clothes and ate simple meals while he pursued what others saw as an impractical dream. The voices of doubt grew louder in his mind with each passing day, whispering that perhaps he should abandon his art and seek more profitable employment. One particularly difficult morning, after a week of especially poor sales, Akira sat at his stall, feeling more discouraged than ever before. The spring rain had kept most customers away, and those who did venture into the marketplace seemed interested only in practical goods, not in the beauty he spent hours creating with such careful attention to every stroke. As he contemplated packing up early and going home, an elderly man approached his stall with slow, deliberate steps. The stranger was unlike the usual marketplace visitors, dressed in the simple robes of a wandering scholar, his face deeply lined with age, but his eyes bright with an intelligence that seemed to see everything at once. He examined Akira's work in complete silence, picking up scroll after scroll, studying each character with the intensity of someone reading sacred texts. Finally, he set down a piece featuring a poem about the impermanence of cherry blossoms and looked directly into Akira's eyes. "Young master," the old man said, his voice soft, but carrying an authority that commanded attention. "Your brushwork is technically excellent, your composition flawless, but tell me, what do you think about while you create these beautiful characters?" The question caught Akira off guard, for no customer had ever asked him about his inner state while working only about prices and practical matters. "I think about making the strokes perfect," Akira replied honestly. "About creating something beautiful that people will want to buy, about supporting my family through my art." The old man nodded thoughtfully, then asked if he might sit and watch Akira work. Something in his manner suggested this was not a casual request, so Akira prepared fresh ink and selected a new sheet of rice paper. As Akira began to write, he became acutely aware of the old man's presence, of being observed and perhaps judged. His usual fluid movements became slightly stiff, his breathing shallow with concentration on performing well. The characters that emerged were technically correct, but somehow lifeless, lacking the natural grace that usually flowed through his brush. When he finished, the old man studied the work with the same careful attention he had given the previous scrolls. "Now," the elder said gently, "I want you to try something different. Instead of thinking about the outcome, about whether this will sell or what others will think, I want you to become completely absorbed in this single moment. Feel the weight of the brush in your hand, the texture of the paper beneath it, the way the ink flows from bristles to surface. Let yourself disappear into the act of creation itself." Though puzzled by this unusual instruction, Akira found himself following the old man's guidance. As he prepared to write again, he allowed his awareness to settle completely into the present moment. He felt the smooth bamboo handle of his brush, noticed the subtle variations in the paper's surface, observed how the black ink seemed to contain infinite depth. When he began to write, something extraordinary happened. The brush seemed to move by itself, guided by an intelligence beyond his conscious control. Each stroke flowed naturally into the next, creating characters that were not just technically perfect, but alive with a vitality he had never achieved before. The words seemed to dance across the paper, expressing not just their literal meaning, but the very essence of the concepts they represented. When he finished both, he and the old man sat in stunned silence. "This," the elder said, finally holding up the scroll with reverence, "is true calligraphy. When the artist disappears completely into the work, when there is no separation between creator and creation, then the brush becomes a channel for something far greater than individual skill or intention. This is what the ancient masters called no mind, the state where technique transcends itself and becomes pure expression." Through the remainder of that day, the old man continued to guide Akira in this new approach to his art. Instead of focusing on results, Akira learned to lose himself completely in the process of creation. Each character became a meditation, each stroke an opportunity to experience the profound stillness that exists at the heart of all authentic artistic expression. The scrolls he created during those hours possessed a quality that attracted customers like flowers draw bees. People who had never shown interest in calligraphy found themselves stopping to study his work, drawn by something they couldn't quite name but could definitely feel. The characters seemed to radiate a peaceful energy that calmed the mind and opened the heart. Sales that had been virtually non-existent suddenly flourished as word spread about the calligrapher whose work could touch the soul. As evening approached and the old man prepared to continue his journey, he offered Akira one final teaching. "Remember," he said, "that your true purpose is not to make money or gain recognition, but to serve as a clear channel through which beauty can enter the world. When you write, with no thought of personal gain, when you become completely transparent to the creative force that flows through all things, then your work becomes a gift that enriches everyone who encounters it." From that day forward, Akira's approach to his craft was completely transformed. Each morning he would begin his work with a period of meditation, settling his mind into the state of receptive emptiness the old master had shown him. His calligraphy became renowned throughout the city, not just for its technical excellence, but for its ability to convey the deepest truths of the human heart through the simple medium of brush and ink. Years later, when students came to learn from him, Akira would always begin their instruction with the same lesson the wandering scholar had taught him. Before you can create true art, he would tell them, you must learn to get out of your own way. The greatest masterpieces are not made by the ego trying to impress others, but by the soul expressing its authentic nature through whatever medium it has been given. His small stall in the marketplace became a place of pilgrimage for artists and seekers from across the empire, all drawn by the recognition that here was someone who had discovered the secret of transforming ordinary work into sacred practice. The scrolls he created were treasured not just as decorative objects, but as windows into the infinite creativity that flows through all existence, when the personal self steps aside and allows the universal to express itself. In the peaceful hours before sleep, when the day's striving naturally gives way to deeper currents of being, this ancient wisdom continues to offer its transformative power. Like Akira, learning to disappear into his art, each soul can discover that true fulfillment comes not from achieving personal goals, but from becoming a clear channel through which life's infinite creativity can flow into the world, blessing all who encounter its authentic expression. In the remote valleys of ancient Korea, where mist-shrouded mountains held secrets older than memory and streams sang lullabies to the sleeping stones, there lived a young weaver named Min Jun, whose fingers possessed an almost supernatural ability to transform simple threads into tapestries of breathtaking beauty. His workshop, nestled in a grove of ancient pines beside a crystal-clear brook, contained looms that had been passed down through 7 generations of his family, each one seasoned by decades of patient work and imbued with the accumulated wisdom of countless hands. From childhood, Min Jun had shown an extraordinary talent for his craft, able to see patterns and color combinations that others could not even imagine. His tapestries told stories without words, capturing the essence of changing seasons, the dance of wind through bamboo forests, the play of moonlight on still water. Merchants traveled from distant kingdoms to commission his work, offering prices that would have made him wealthy beyond his modest dreams. Yet despite his remarkable gift and the recognition it brought him, Min Jun found himself increasingly tormented by a perfectionism that had grown like a thorny vine around his heart. Each new piece had to surpass the last. Each thread had to be placed with absolute precision. Each color had to achieve a harmony so perfect that even the slightest imperfection would cause him to unravel hours or even days of work and begin again. What had once been a source of joy had become a prison of impossible standards. His workshop, once filled with the peaceful rhythm of shuttle and loom, now echoed with sighs of frustration and the sound of work being torn apart and started over. Min Jun would labor for weeks on a single piece only to destroy it in a moment of dissatisfaction, unable to accept anything less than an ideal that seemed to retreat further from his grasp with each attempt to achieve it. Sleep became elusive as his mind raced with visions of flaws that others could not see, imperfections that haunted him like restless spirits. One winter morning, as snow fell in thick curtains outside his workshop, and the world lay hushed beneath a blanket of pristine white, Min Jun discovered that his most prized possession, a tapestry depicting the 4 seasons that had taken him 3 years to complete, had been damaged during the night. A small tear had appeared in one corner, caused perhaps by a mouse seeking shelter from the cold or simply by the natural aging of the delicate silk threads. As he stared at the damaged masterpiece, Min Jun felt something break inside him. All his careful work, all his painstaking attention to detail, all his pursuit of perfection had been rendered meaningless by this tiny flaw. In a moment of despair, deeper than any he had ever known, he sank to his knees beside the ruined tapestry and wept tears that seemed to carry within them all the frustration and futility of his endless striving. It was in this moment of complete surrender that an unexpected visitor appeared at his door. She was an ancient woman bent with age, her clothes simple and patched, her face lined with wrinkles that spoke of a long life filled with both sorrow and joy. Despite the bitter cold, she wore only a thin shawl over her shoulders, yet she seemed completely untroubled by the harsh weather. "Young master," she said in a voice like wind through dry leaves, "I have walked far to see the work of the famous weaver, but I find you in tears. What sorrow could touch one so blessed with talent and success?" Minjun looked up at her through his tears, seeing in her weathered face a kindness that invited complete honesty. "My life's greatest work is ruined," he said, gesturing toward the damaged tapestry. 3 years of perfect effort destroyed by a single moment of carelessness. All my striving for perfection has come to nothing. The old woman moved closer to examine the tapestry, her ancient eyes studying every detail with the attention of a true connoisseur. "I see great beauty here," she said finally. "But tell me, what do you see when you look upon this work?" Minjun's gaze followed hers across the intricate patterns, the subtle gradations of color, the masterful technique that had earned him fame throughout the land. But all he could focus on was the small tear that marred what had once been perfect. "I see only the flaw," he admitted, his voice heavy with defeat. "Everything else becomes meaningless in the presence of that single imperfection." The old woman nodded with understanding, then asked if she might sit beside the damaged tapestry for a while. Something in her manner suggested this was not a casual request, so Minjun brought cushions and tea, settling beside her in the quiet workshop. As they sat together in contemplative silence, the old woman began to speak of other weavers she had known in her long life, masters who had discovered that true artistry lay not in the elimination of flaws, but in the integration of imperfection into a larger pattern of beauty. She told of a legendary craftsman who deliberately included small irregularities in his work, believing that these mistakes were where the soul of the piece resided. "Perfection," she said, her fingers gently tracing the edges of the tear, "is like trying to capture the wind in a jar. The moment you think you have achieved it, it becomes something dead and lifeless. But imperfection, our imperfection is alive, breathing human. It connects us to the great mystery of existence, where nothing remains unchanged, where even the most beautiful flower must eventually fade." Through the long afternoon, as snow continued to fall outside and the light gradually dimmed toward evening, the old woman shared stories and teachings that began to shift something fundamental in Minjun's understanding. She spoke of the Japanese concept of wabi-sabi, the finding of beauty in imperfection and impermanence. She described how the greatest tea masters deliberately chose bowls with cracks and irregularities, seeing in these flaws a reflection of life's authentic nature. "Your tapestry," she said as darkness began to gather around them, "is not ruined by this small tear. It is completed by it. This tiny imperfection tells the story that your perfect technique could never convey. The story of vulnerability, of the precious fragility that makes beauty meaningful. Without this flaw, your work would be merely skillful. With it, it becomes profound." As the old woman spoke these words, Minjun began to see his damaged masterpiece with completely new eyes. The tear no longer appeared as a defect that destroyed the whole, but as an integral part of a larger story about the nature of existence itself. The tapestry now spoke not just of the changing seasons, but of the inevitable changes that touch all things, the way that time and circumstance leave their marks on everything we create and cherish. When morning came and the old woman prepared to continue her journey, she left Minjun with a final gift of understanding. "Remember," she said, shouldering her simple pack, "that your true masterpiece is not any single work you create, but the quality of presence and acceptance you bring to the act of creation itself. When you can embrace imperfection as readily as you pursue excellence, when you can find beauty in the broken as easily as in the whole, then every thread you weave becomes a teaching about the profound mystery of existence." From that day forward, Minjun's approach to his craft underwent a complete transformation. He continued to work with the same technical skill and artistic vision that had made him famous. But now he welcomed the unexpected, the unplanned, the imperfect as essential elements in his creative process. His new tapestries possessed a quality of aliveness and authenticity that touched viewers at the deepest level, speaking to something in the human heart that recognized truth when it encountered it. The damaged tapestry that had once caused him such despair became his most treasured possession, displayed prominently in his workshop as a reminder of the profound teaching he had received. Visitors would often ask about the small tear in the corner, and Minjun would smile and tell them about the ancient woman who had shown him that perfection was not the absence of flaws, but the complete acceptance of life exactly as it presents itself. Years later, when students came to learn from him, Minjun would always begin their instruction by showing them that precious, damaged tapestry. "This tear," he would tell them, "taught me that our greatest teachers often come disguised as our greatest disappointments. When we can embrace what seems to be failure or imperfection, we discover that it contains the very wisdom we have been seeking." In the gentle hours before sleep, when the day's struggles naturally give way to deeper understanding, this ancient wisdom continues to offer its healing presence. Like Minjun, learning to find beauty in the broken, each soul can discover that life's apparent imperfections are not obstacles to overcome, but gateways to a more profound and authentic way of being, where every flaw becomes a doorway to greater compassion, and every mistake becomes a teacher of invaluable wisdom. In the ancient mountains of Tibet, where the air grows thin and prayer flags flutter like colorful butterflies against the endless blue sky, there lived a young monk named Pemba, whose heart burned with an insatiable desire to achieve enlightenment. Unlike his fellow monks who seemed content with the slow, steady rhythm of monastic life, Pemba approached his spiritual practice with the intensity of a warrior charging into battle, determined to conquer the mysteries of existence through sheer force of will and unwavering dedication. Every morning, before dawn, while others still slept peacefully in their simple cells, Pemba would rise and make his way to the meditation hall, where he would sit in perfect lotus position for hours, his spine straight as a mountain pine, his breathing controlled with mathematical precision. He memorized countless sutras, performed prostrations until his knees bled, and fasted until his body became as thin as the mountain air itself, believing that through such extreme discipline he could force his mind to surrender its secrets. The monastery where Pemba lived clung to the side of a cliff like a bird's nest. Its ancient walls weathered by centuries of wind and snow, its halls echoing with the chanted prayers of generations of seekers who had walked this path before him. The head lama, a man of such profound stillness that he seemed to exist in a realm beyond ordinary time, watched Pemba's frantic efforts with the patient compassion of one who had seen many young monks make the same mistake. Years passed, and despite his heroic efforts, Pemba found himself no closer to the enlightenment he sought so desperately. If anything, His mind seemed more agitated than ever, filled with frustration at his apparent lack of progress, tormented by doubts about his worthiness, consumed by a burning ambition that grew stronger with each failed attempt to extinguish it. The harder he tried to grasp the truth, the more elusive it became, like trying to catch moonbeams in his bare hands. One winter evening, a fierce blizzard raged outside the monastery walls, and the wind howled like hungry ghosts through the mountain passes. Pemba sat alone in the meditation hall, his body racked with exhaustion from another day of intensive practice. His mind raced with questions that had no answers, doubts that gnawed at his faith like termites eating away at the foundation of a house. In a moment of complete despair, he collapsed forward, his forehead touching the cold stone floor, and wept tears of defeat. It was then that the old Lama appeared beside him, moving with such silent grace that he seemed to materialize from the shadows themselves. Without speaking, the ancient teacher sat down next to Pemba, his presence radiating a peace so profound that it seemed to calm even the raging storm outside. For a long time they sat together in silence, the only sound the distant howling of the wind and the soft whisper of Pemba's gradually slowing breath. "Tell me, young one," the Lama finally said, his voice barely audible above the storm. "What is it that you seek with such desperate hunger?" Pemba raised his tear-stained face, looking into eyes that seemed to hold the depth of mountain lakes reflecting infinite sky. "I seek enlightenment, Master," he replied, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "I want to understand the true nature of reality, to free myself from suffering, to achieve the same perfect peace that radiates from you." The old Lama smiled with infinite gentleness, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long storm. "And tell me," he continued, "where do you believe this enlightenment can be found? In what distant place does it hide, waiting for you to discover it through your heroic efforts?" Pemba considered the question carefully, his mind automatically reaching for the complex philosophical answers he had memorized from countless texts. "Enlightenment is the realization of our Buddha nature," he recited, "the recognition of the emptiness that underlies all phenomena, the cessation of attachment, and the end of the cycle of suffering." The Lama nodded appreciatively at the accuracy of the response, then asked another question that stopped Pemba's analytical mind in its tracks. "These are beautiful words," the teacher said, "but tell me, who is it that seeks this enlightenment? Who is this one that struggles so mightily to achieve what you describe?" As Pemba opened his mouth to answer, he found himself confronting a mystery he had never considered. Who indeed was this seeker, this one who wanted enlightenment so desperately? The more he looked for this seeker, the more elusive it became. Through the long night, as the storm gradually subsided and gave way to the crystal clarity of mountain dawn, the Lama guided Pemba through a series of inquiries that slowly dissolved the very foundation of his seeking. Each question revealed another layer of assumption, another belief that had never been examined, and found concept that existed only in the realm of thought, but had no substantial reality. "You have been like a person searching frantically for the glasses that are already on his face," the Lama explained. As the first rays of sunlight began to illuminate the snow-covered peaks outside, the very one who seeks enlightenment is already the enlightened awareness you seek. You cannot find what you already are, just as the eye cannot see itself or the finger cannot touch its own tip. As these words penetrated the depths of Pemba's understanding, something extraordinary began to happen. The frantic energy that had driven his spiritual practice for so many years simply dissolved like ice melting in warm sunlight. In its place arose a recognition so simple, so obvious, that he wondered how he could have missed it for so long. The awareness that was reading these thoughts, the consciousness that was experiencing this moment was itself the very enlightenment he had been seeking. "But Master," Pemba said, his voice filled with wonder, "if this is true, then why do we practice at all? Why do we meditate and study and follow all these disciplines if we are already what we seek to become?" The Lama's eyes twinkled with the joy of a teacher whose student has finally grasped a crucial point. "Practice," he replied, "is not about achieving something new, but about removing the obstacles that prevent us from recognizing what has always been present. It is like polishing a mirror that has become covered with dust. The mirror's capacity to reflect is not created by the polishing, but simply revealed when the dust is removed." From that moment forward, Pemba's entire approach to spiritual life underwent a complete transformation. He continued to meditate, but now his sitting was not a desperate attempt to achieve some future state, but a gentle resting in the awareness that was already present. He studied the teachings not to acquire new knowledge, but to deepen his recognition of the truth that was his own essential nature. The other monks noticed the change in Pemba immediately. The frantic energy that had once characterized his every action was replaced by a natural ease and spontaneity that drew others to him like flowers turning toward the sun. His presence became a teaching in itself, demonstrating that true spiritual realization was not about becoming someone special, but about recognizing the extraordinary nature of ordinary awareness. Years later, when Pemba had become a teacher himself, students would often come to him with the same desperate seeking that had once consumed his own life. To each one, he would offer the same gentle inquiry that had liberated him from the prison of his own striving. "Who is it that seeks?" he would ask with infinite compassion. "Can you find this seeker that wants enlightenment so badly?" Some students would understand immediately, their faces lighting up with the recognition of their own true nature. Others would struggle for months or years before the penny dropped, and they saw through the illusion of being a separate self that needed to achieve something. But Pemba remained patient with all of them, knowing that each person's journey to this recognition followed its own perfect timing. The monastery where Pemba taught became known throughout Tibet as a place where seekers could discover the end of seeking, where the desperate search for enlightenment could finally come to rest in the simple recognition of what had always been present. Pilgrims would climb the treacherous mountain paths, not to acquire some new spiritual attainment, but to remember what they had temporarily forgotten about their own essential nature. In the peaceful hours before sleep, when the mind naturally begins to settle and the heart opens to deeper truths, this ancient wisdom continues to offer its liberating message. Like Pemba, discovering that the seeker and the sought are one, each soul can awaken to the recognition that what we most deeply long for is not something to be achieved in the future, but the very awareness that is experiencing this present moment. The consciousness that has never been absent, the peace that passeth understanding, because it is the very ground of understanding itself. In the sacred valleys of ancient Bhutan, where monasteries perched like jewels on impossible cliffs and the sound of temple bells carried across terraced fields of barley and prayer flags, there lived a master gardener named Dorje, whose skill in cultivating the monastery's medicinal herb garden had become legendary throughout the Himalayan kingdoms. For 40 years, he had tended the same small plot of earth, coaxing healing plants from soil that seemed too rocky and harsh to support any life at all. Dorje's garden was a miracle of patience and understanding, containing rare herbs that grew nowhere else. In the region, plants whose healing properties were so potent that pilgrims would journey for months just to obtain a small portion of their leaves or roots. Monks from distant monasteries would send emissaries to study his methods, hoping to replicate his success in their own communities, but somehow the same techniques that worked so magnificently in Dorje's hands would fail when attempted elsewhere. What made Dorje's approach unique was not any secret knowledge or special technique, but rather the quality of attention he brought to his work. Each morning before dawn, he would sit in meditation among his plants, not to perform any specific practice, but simply to attune himself to the subtle rhythms and needs of the living beings in his care. He could sense when a plant was struggling with disease, when the soil needed particular nutrients, when the timing was perfect for harvesting or transplanting. Yet, despite his extraordinary success and the reverence with which others regarded his abilities, Dorje found himself increasingly troubled by a growing sense of separation from the very garden that had been his life's work. As his reputation spread and more visitors came seeking his wisdom, he began to feel like he was performing a role rather than simply being himself. The natural intimacy he had once shared with his plants seemed to be fading, replaced by a self-consciousness that made him question every decision. The problem had begun subtly, almost imperceptibly, when a famous physician from the royal court had visited the monastery and proclaimed Dorje's garden to be the finest example of a medicinal cultivation he had ever encountered. The praise, though well-intentioned, had planted a seed of self-awareness that gradually grew into a thorny vine of doubt and performance anxiety. Dorje found himself watching his own actions, evaluating his techniques, wondering if each choice he made was worthy of his reputation. One autumn morning, as the first frost painted the high peaks silver and the garden prepared for its winter rest, Dorje discovered that his most precious plant, a rare healing herb that bloomed only once every 7 years, had withered and died during the night. This plant had been the crown jewel of his collection, sought after by healers throughout the region, and its loss felt like a personal failure that shattered his confidence completely. As he knelt beside the dead plant, overwhelmed by grief and self-recrimination, Dorje was approached by a young novice monk named Tashi, who had recently arrived at the monastery. Unlike the learned scholars and experienced practitioners who usually sought Dorje's wisdom, Tashi possessed a simple, childlike curiosity about the natural world that reminded the master gardener of his own early days in the garden. "Master Dorje," the young monk said with genuine concern, "I see that you are troubled. Is there something I might do to help?" The question, asked with such innocent sincerity, touched something deep in Dorje's heart. Here was someone who saw him not as a famous gardener, whose reputation preceded him, but simply as a fellow human being in distress. "This plant," Dorje said, gesturing toward the withered remains, "was the most important specimen in the entire garden. I have failed in my duty to care for it, and now its healing gifts are lost forever." Tashi examined the dead plant with the same careful attention he brought to everything, then looked up at Dorje with eyes that held no judgment, only compassion. "Master," the young monk said thoughtfully, "may I ask you something? When you first began working in this garden 40 years ago, before anyone knew your name or sought your wisdom, how did you feel about the plants that died?" The question caught Dorje off guard, forcing him to remember a time when plant death was simply a natural part of the gardening cycle, not a reflection of his personal worth or professional competence. "I felt sad," Dorje replied honestly, "but I also understood that death was part of the natural order. I would compost the dead plants and use their nutrients to feed the living ones. It never occurred to me to take their deaths personally." As he spoke these words, Dorje began to see how his relationship with his work had gradually shifted from one of natural participation to one of anxious performance. Tashi nodded with understanding beyond his years, then asked another question that penetrated even deeper. "And when plants thrived and grew strong, did you feel proud of your achievement? Or did you simply feel grateful to witness their natural unfolding?" Again, Dorje found himself remembering the early days when success and failure were not personal victories or defeats, but simply the natural ebb and flow of life expressing itself through the medium of the garden. Through the morning hours as they worked together to clear away the dead plant and prepare the soil for whatever might grow there next, Tashi's innocent questions helped Dorje rediscover the state of mind that had made his gardening so effortless and successful in the first place. It was a state of complete absorption in the present moment, free from self-consciousness, free from the burden of reputation, free from the need to prove anything to anyone. "You know," Dorje said as they finished their work, "I think I had forgotten that I am not the one who makes plants grow. I am simply the one who creates conditions that allow their own natural intelligence to express itself. When I started believing that their success or failure reflected my skill, I lost touch with the deeper wisdom that had always guided my work." From that day forward, Dorje's approach to gardening underwent a subtle but profound transformation. He continued to apply the same techniques and knowledge he had accumulated over 4 decades, but now he did so from a place of humble service rather than expert performance. He stopped trying to control outcomes and instead focused on being fully present to whatever each moment required. The change was immediately apparent to anyone who visited the garden. The plants seemed to respond to Dorje's renewed presence with even greater vitality than before. New species began to appear spontaneously, as if the garden itself was expressing its gratitude for being tended by someone who had remembered how to get out of the way and let nature's wisdom flow through him. Young Tashi became Dorje's constant companion and eventual successor, learning not just the technical aspects of medicinal gardening, but more importantly, the art of working in harmony with natural processes rather than trying to dominate them. Under their combined care, the garden became a living teaching about the profound effectiveness that emerges when human skill is married to egoless presence. Years later, when visitors would ask Dorje about the secret of his extraordinary success, he would smile and point to the spot where his most precious plant had died. "That plant," he would say, "was my greatest teacher. Its death showed me that I had become attached to being seen as successful, and that attachment was actually interfering with my ability to serve the garden effectively." He would often tell the story of how young Tashi's innocent questions had helped him rediscover the beginner's mind that was the true source of mastery in any field. The moment we start identifying ourselves with our achievements, he would explain, we lose touch with the natural intelligence that made those achievements possible in the first place. The garden became a place of pilgrimage, not just for those seeking healing herbs, but for anyone who wanted to understand how to work with life rather than against it. Visitors would often comment on the profound peace they felt simply by walking among the plants, sensing the harmony that existed between the gardeners and their charges, witnessing the beauty that emerged when human effort was guided by wisdom rather than ego. In the quiet hours before sleep, when the day's activities settle into memory and the heart opens to deeper understanding, this ancient wisdom continues to offer its gentle guidance. Like Dorje, learning to tend his garden without attachment to results, each soul can discover the profound effectiveness that emerges when we stop trying to prove our worth through our achievements and instead focus on serving whatever life has placed in our care with complete presence and humble dedication. In the misty hills of ancient Vietnam, where terraced rice fields climb toward heaven like green staircases, and the morning fog clung to bamboo groves like the breath of sleeping dragons, there lived a fisherman named Min, whose small boat had carried him across the same lake for 30 years. Each dawn, he would push his weathered craft into waters that reflected the sky so perfectly it seemed he was sailing through clouds, casting his nets with movements as graceful and practiced as a temple dancer performing sacred rituals. The lake where Min fished was considered sacred by the villagers who lived along its shores, fed by mountain springs that never ran dry, and home to fish whose silver scales caught sunlight like scattered coins. Local legends spoke of water spirits who blessed those who approached the lake with proper reverence. And indeed, Min's nets were always full while other fishermen struggled to catch enough to feed their families. His success had nothing to do with superior equipment or secret techniques, but rather with a quality of presence that seemed to harmonize perfectly with the natural rhythms of the water. What set Min apart from other fishermen was not his skill with nets and lines, but his profound understanding that fishing was not about taking from the lake, but about participating in an ancient dance of giving and receiving that connected all life. Before casting his first net each morning, he would sit in silent meditation on his boat, feeling himself become part of the vast web of relationships that included the fish, the water, the sky, the mountains, and the countless invisible forces that sustained this delicate ecosystem. Yet, as the years passed, and Min's reputation as the most successful fisherman on the lake grew, he began to notice a subtle change in his relationship with the water and its creatures. Younger fishermen would follow him at a distance, trying to copy his techniques and discover his secrets. Village elders would point him out to their grandchildren as an example of how patience and skill could overcome any obstacle. The attention, though respectful, gradually created a sense of separation between Min and the natural flow that had always guided his work. The change became most apparent during the monsoon season, when heavy rains swelled the lake and changed the behavior of the fish in ways that required constant adaptation. In previous years, Min had navigated these seasonal shifts with intuitive ease, sensing where the fish had moved and adjusting his approach accordingly. But now he found himself second-guessing his instincts, wondering if his choices lived up to his reputation, analyzing his decisions instead of simply flowing with the moment. One particularly challenging morning, after several days of poor catches that had shaken his confidence, Min encountered an old woman sitting alone on the shore, her fishing line disappearing into the still water. She was clearly not from the village, her clothes simple and travel-worn, her face bearing the deep lines that spoke of a long life spent mostly outdoors. Despite her humble appearance, there was something about her presence that commanded respect, a stillness that seemed to calm even the restless water around her feet. "Grandfather fisherman," she called out as Min prepared to launch his boat, using the respectful term for an elder, though she appeared to be at least as old as he was. "Might an old woman ask for your wisdom? I have been fishing since before dawn, yet my line remains empty, while the lake surely holds many fish." Her question was asked with such genuine humility that Min found himself drawn to help despite his own recent struggles. As he approached the shore, Min noticed something remarkable about the old woman's fishing setup. Her equipment was even more basic than his own, consisting of nothing more than a simple bamboo pole, a length of line, and a hook baited with a small piece of bread. Yet, as he watched her cast the line, he was struck by the complete absence of effort or strain in her movements. She seemed to be offering the bait to the water, rather than trying to trick fish into taking it. "Honored grandmother," Min said respectfully, "your technique appears flawless to my eyes. Perhaps the fish are simply not feeding in this location today." The old woman smiled with the gentle amusement of someone who had heard many such explanations over the years, then asked a question that stopped Min's analytical mind in its tracks. "Tell me, experienced fisherman," she said, her voice carrying the authority of deep wisdom, "when you cast your nets, who is doing the fishing? Is it you who catches the fish, or do the fish choose to enter your nets?" The question seemed simple on the surface, but as Min considered it more deeply, he realized it pointed to something fundamental about the nature of his relationship with the lake and its creatures. For 30 years, Min had thought of himself as the active agent in fishing, the one who made decisions and took actions that resulted in successful catches. But as he reflected on his most productive days, he began to recognize that his best fishing had always happened when he felt least like he was doing anything at all, when he was so completely absorbed in the present moment that there was no sense of a separate self trying to accomplish something. "I see that my question has touched something deep," the old woman observed, watching the play of recognition and confusion across Min's weathered features. "Come sit with me for a while, and let us fish together in the old way, the way that honors the wisdom of the water itself." Something in her invitation resonated with a part of Min that he had almost forgotten, the part that had first fallen in love with fishing not as a means of livelihood, but as a form of communion with the natural world. As they sat together on the shore, their lines disappearing into the mirror-smooth surface of the lake, the old woman began to share stories of other fishermen she had known. Masters who had discovered that the most effective fishing happened when they stopped trying to fish and, instead, became so present to the moment that they merged completely with the process itself. She spoke of the ancient understanding that fish were not objects to be captured, but fellow beings participating in the same dance of life and death that connected all creatures. "The fish," she explained as a gentle breeze rippled the water's surface, "are always aware of the fisherman's intention. When we approach them with grasping and desperation, they sense our neediness and avoid our hooks. But when we offer our bait with the same generosity that the lake offers its water to the sky, then the fish respond to our gift with their own gift of themselves." Through the long mornings they sat in comfortable silence punctuated by occasional gentle teachings, Min felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of his craft. The old woman's presence seemed to dissolve the invisible barrier that had grown between him and the lake, allowing him to remember the state of effortless participation that had made his fishing so successful in earlier years. When the sun reached its zenith and the old woman prepared to continue her journey, she offered Min a final teaching that would transform his approach to fishing forever. "Remember," she said, shouldering her simple pack, that the lake does not fish for itself, yet it is never without fish. The sky does not rain for its own benefit, yet it is never without clouds. When you can fish with the same selfless generosity that nature shows in all its processes, then you will never lack for what you truly need. From that day forward, Min's relationship with fishing underwent a complete transformation. He continued to use the same techniques and visit the same locations that had served him well for 3 decades. But now he approached his work from a place of offering rather than taking. Each cast of his net became a gift to the lake. Each moment on the water became an opportunity to participate in the ancient dance of giving and receiving that sustained all life. The change was immediately apparent to anyone who observed him at work. The frantic energy that had begun to characterize his fishing in recent years was replaced by a natural ease and flow that seemed to draw fish to his nets like iron filings to a magnet. His catches became not just abundant, but somehow more appropriate, as if the lake itself was selecting exactly the fish that were needed by his family and the village market. Other fishermen began to notice the transformation and would often ask Min about his renewed success. He would always credit the old woman who had appeared at just the right moment to remind him of truths he had temporarily forgotten. "She taught me," he would explain, "that fishing is not about taking from the lake, but about participating so completely in its natural processes that the fish offer themselves freely." Years later, when Min had become an elder himself, he would often sit on the shore in the early morning hours, not to fish, but simply to commune with the water that had been his teacher and companion for so many decades. Young fishermen would sometimes approach him for advice, and he would always begin by asking them the same question the old woman had posed to him. "Who is doing the fishing when you cast your nets?" In the peaceful hours before sleep, when the day's activities settle into the deeper currents of being, this ancient wisdom continues to offer its transformative power. Like Min, learning to fish without grasping each soul can discover that life's greatest gifts come not through force or manipulation, but through the complete surrender that allows us to become transparent channels for the natural generosity that flows through all existence, blessing both giver and receiver in the eternal dance of mutual nourishment. In the ancient kingdom of Myanmar, where golden pagodas rose like prayers made manifest, and the Irrawaddy River carried the dreams of countless generations toward the distant sea, there lived a bell maker named Thara, whose bronze creations sang with voices so pure and resonant that they were said to carry prayers directly to the ears of the Buddha himself. His workshop, nestled in the shadow of the great Shwedagon Pagoda, had been the source of temple bells for over 2 centuries, each generation of his family adding their own understanding to the sacred craft of transforming metal into music. Thara had inherited not only his grandfather's tools and techniques, but also an almost supernatural sensitivity to the subtle qualities that distinguished a merely functional bell from one that could touch the deepest chambers of the human heart. He could hear the difference between bronze that had been heated with patience and bronze that had been rushed through the fire. He could sense which bells would crack under the stress of years and which would grow more beautiful with age, their voices deepening and mellowing like fine wine. The process of creating a temple bell was itself a form of meditation that could take months to complete. First came the careful selection and preparation of metals, copper and tin, mixed in proportions that had been refined over generations of experimentation. Then the construction of the clay mold, shaped with such precision that even the slightest irregularity would affect the bell's voice. Finally, the casting itself a moment of such critical importance that Thara would fast and meditate for days beforehand, ensuring that his mind was perfectly clear when the molten bronze flowed into its destined form. Yet, despite his mastery of this ancient art and the reverence with which monks and lay people alike regarded his work, Thara found himself increasingly troubled by a growing sense that something essential was missing from his bells. They were technically perfect, their tones pure and their construction flawless, but somehow they lacked the transcendent quality that he remembered from the bells created by his grandfather. Bells that seemed to carry within their bronze hearts a wisdom that went beyond mere craftsmanship. The problem had begun several years earlier, when a delegation of foreign collectors had visited his workshop, offering enormous sums for his finest bells to display in museums and private collections around the world. The attention and financial rewards were flattering, but gradually Thara began to notice that he was creating bells, not for their intended purpose of calling the faithful to prayer, but as objects of artistic appreciation for people who would never hear them ring in their proper context. One monsoon evening, as rain drummed against the workshop roof and the air filled with the rich scent of wet earth, Thara was working late on a particularly challenging commission when he was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. An ancient monk appeared at his door, his robes so faded they seemed to have absorbed the color of twilight itself, his face bearing the serene expression of one who had found perfect peace in the midst of an imperfect world. "Master Bellmaker," the monk said with a bow that conveyed both respect and authority, "I have traveled far to speak with you about a matter of great importance to our monastery. We are in need of a bell, but not just any bell. We require one that can awaken sleeping souls, one whose voice can cut through the noise of worldly concerns and remind people of their true nature." Something in the monk's manner suggested that this was not an ordinary commission. As Thara listened to the monk's requirements, he felt both excitement and trepidation. This was exactly the kind of challenge that had drawn him to bell making in the first place, the opportunity to create something that would serve a truly sacred purpose. Yet, he also felt the weight of recent failures, bells that had been technically perfect but somehow spiritually hollow, lacking the mysterious quality that transformed mere sound into a doorway to the divine. "Venerable sir," Thara replied honestly, "I must confess that my recent work has not achieved the transcendent quality you describe. I fear I may have lost touch with whatever it was that made my grandfather's bells so extraordinary. Perhaps you would be better served by seeking another craftsman." The monk smiled with the gentle compassion of one who had encountered this particular form of spiritual crisis many times before. "Tell me," the old monk said, settling himself comfortably on a cushion beside Thara's workbench, "what do you think made your grandfather's bells so special? What quality did they possess that your current work seems to lack?" The question forced Thara to examine memories he had not revisited in years, recollections of watching his grandfather work with a quality of presence that seemed to infuse every action with sacred intention. "My grandfather," Thara said slowly, "never seemed to be making bells for anyone in particular. He would work in complete absorption, as if each bell was being created for its own sake, not to fulfill a commission or earn money or gain recognition. He often said that the bell maker's job was not to impose his will on the bronze, but to help it discover its own perfect voice." The monk nodded with understanding, then asked another question that penetrated even deeper. And when you create bells now, for whom are you making them? What intention guides your hands as you shape the clay and pour the bronze? As Thara considered this question, he began to see how his relationship with his craft had gradually shifted from one of service to something more self-serving. Through the long night, as rain continued to fall and the workshop filled with the peaceful energy of deep conversation, the monk helped Thara understand that the transcendent quality he sought could not be achieved through technique alone, but only through the complete surrender of personal agenda that allowed the bell maker to become a transparent channel for the sacred forces that wanted to express themselves through bronze and fire. Your grandfather's bells were extraordinary, the monk explained, Dad, not because he was more skilled than you, but because he approached his work as a form of devotional practice. Each bell was an offering, a prayer made manifest in metal. He was not trying to create something beautiful or impressive, but simply allowing beauty to emerge through his complete dedication to the process itself. As dawn approached and the rain began to subside, Thara felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of his craft. The monk's words had awakened a recognition that had been dormant for years, a remembering of the sacred dimension that had originally drawn him to bell making. He realized that his recent dissatisfaction had not been due to any lack of technical skill, but to a gradual forgetting of the devotional attitude that transformed craft into spiritual practice. I understand now, Thara said as the first light of morning began to filter through the workshop windows. I have been trying to make bells that would enhance my reputation rather than bells that would serve their true purpose. I had forgotten that the bell maker is not the creator of the bell's voice, but simply the one who provides the conditions that allow that voice to emerge. The monk smiled with the joy of a teacher whose student has grasped a crucial truth. When you can approach your work with the same selfless devotion that a monk brings to meditation, when each hammer blow becomes a prayer and each moment of shaping becomes an act of worship, then your bells will once again carry the power to awaken sleeping souls and remind people of their divine nature. From that day forward, Thara's approach to bell making underwent a complete transformation. He began each project with a period of meditation and prayer, asking not for personal success, but for the wisdom to serve whatever sacred purpose the bell was meant to fulfill. He worked with the same technical precision he had always maintained, but now his actions flowed from a heart filled with devotion rather than ambition. The change was immediately apparent in the bells he created. They possessed a quality of presence that was unmistakable, a voice that seemed to carry within it the accumulated wisdom of all the prayers that had been offered in their creation. Monks and lay people alike reported that hearing these bells ring was like receiving a direct transmission of peace, a moment of perfect clarity that reminded them of their deepest spiritual aspirations. The bell commissioned by the ancient monk became Thara's masterpiece, a creation so extraordinary that its voice was said to be audible not just to the ears, but to the heart itself. When it was finally installed in the monastery and rung for the first time, people from villages miles away reported feeling a profound sense of peace wash over them, as if the bell's voice carried healing vibrations that touched every living being within its range. Years later, when students came to learn the art of bell making from Thara, he would always begin their instruction with the same teaching the old monk had given him. Before you can create a bell that sings with divine voice, he would tell them you must learn to work with divine intention. The bronze does not care about your reputation or your profit, but it responds immediately to the quality of love and devotion you bring to your craft. In the gentle hours before sleep, when the day's activities settle into the deeper rhythms of being, this ancient wisdom continues to offer its transformative power. Like Thara, learning to create bells that serve the sacred rather than the ego, each soul can discover that when we approach our daily work as a form of devotional practice, when we offer our skills in service of something greater than personal gain, then even the most ordinary tasks become opportunities for the divine to express itself through our willing hands, blessing both creator and recipient in the eternal dance of sacred service.